Thank you for staying with us. World leaders have gathered for a third day of the 77th United Nations General Assembly in New York, where they'll be thrashing out a host of issues such as climate change, peace and security, amongst others. Let's get a more detailed breakdown from Voice of America's Peter Clottey, who joins me now live from New York. Peter, very good evening. Thanks for speaking to us. A watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges is a theme of the 77th UN General Assembly. What do you make of what's transpired over the last few days?
It's been interesting, especially from the African delegation. We've had a series of African heads of states calling for the end of the conflict in Ukraine, or the invasion of Ukraine by Russia to end, because the consequences have been dire to a lot of African countries who have been trying to build up their economy battered by the pandemic. You know, they are just coming out of pandemic. They are putting in policies to try to jumpstart the economy, to create jobs for the youth who have been agitated because they don't see a lot of opportunities. So with the war in Ukraine, it's affecting them. Nothing seems to be moving. Prices of goods and services going up, soaring inflation, and people getting worried that their governments are not doing enough. So there has been a unanimous call by a lot of these African leaders to have an expedited process to resolve the war in Ukraine, or the conflict in Ukraine. So that is what is going on. A lot of them also, especially in the SADC region, have been calling on Western nations to lift the sanctions on Zimbabwe, particularly, saying that the sanctions have outlived their purpose. Others also are calling for the Western nations, or wealthier nations, who they say their activities have sharply contributed to the deterioration or climate change, to put their money where their mouth is, to help Africa bearing the brunt of climate change, to pushing the effect of climate change. So these are some of the issues that are ongoing. And of course, you saw the meeting between Rwandan President Paul Kagame and Felix Tshisekedi of DRC. The two sides have been trading back and forth accusations. They held a meeting mediated by Mr. Emmanuel Macron of France, and they're trying to find a solution. President Paul Kagame said throwing accusations his way or his country's way is not the solution to the problem. DRC is saying it has empirical evidence that shows that the government in Rwanda is backing the M23 rebels. So it has to be resolved. A lot of the African leaders are calling on the two leaders to have a sit-down dialogue to try to resolve those issues. So these are some of the highlights going on here at the UN General Assembly in New York.
Well, Peter, let's break down some of these issues, starting obviously with the call for lifting of sanctions by Naledi Pandor, South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. And the argument, obviously, as you suggest, is that the sanctions have outlived their usefulness. In fact, whilst they are labelled as targeted sanctions, all they've done is made life extremely difficult for the common Zimbabwean. And over and above that, what it's done is also put pressure on surrounding countries, surrounding economies such as South Africa, because there's been a huge movement of Zimbabweans and other nationals where countries are suffering because of economic challenges into their borders.
Well, the president of Botswana, Dr. Mokwetsi Masisi, in an interview with us, told me on Sunday that the wealthier nations should do well to resolve or lift the sanctions on Zimbabwe, saying that it's putting pressure on a lot of countries because the ordinary people are the ones suffering and not the political class for which reason the sanctions were placed in the first place, and that countries like Botswana, South Africa, Lesotho, Eswatini are all bearing the brunt of people, because you have economic migrants who are seeking greener pastures, putting pressure and sometimes on the on the infrastructure of other neighboring countries. Recently, you heard in South Africa that one official was saying that people are coming there without going to hospitals or clinics, without having the adequate adequate payment requirement needed to be serviced and all that. So it's putting pressure on a lot of African countries. That is one of the reasons why some of the SADC members are calling on the international community and wealthier nations to try to ease the sanctions on Zimbabwe. I spoke with some Zimbabwean officials on the sidelines of some meetings here, and they were saying they're trying to reset some relations so the sanctions could be released, and that they have a different mindset. They are trying to work things out. Things are difficult, but they are trying to work with their international partners to have investors come back to the country and try to resolve some of these issues that have been difficult for their respective governments, especially in Harare.
Now, Peter, it is very clear from the conversations and the world leaders that are present at a summit such as the UN 77th General Summit that the audience, no doubt, is there. The question, though, is what happens post these conversations? What happens post these addresses by the various African leaders on these issues that are very, very passionate about? Is there any movement?
Yeah, apart from the ongoing debate at the General Assembly, there are a plethora of meetings on the sidelines where experts and government officials are meeting, one another, trying to come up with strategic solutions to resolve some of these challenges confronting everybody, including climate change and the sanctions on Zimbabwe, the political stability on the continent. An example is the meeting that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, had with the president of Rwanda and the president of DRC, Felix Tshisekedi. These were on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. So apart from the debate ongoing, there are side meetings that are ongoing with experts, with policymakers, with lobbyists, with government officials, all going, trying to find solutions to their respective problems. So I have attended quite a few of them, and I see what goes on. I just left a meeting where the Nigerian government is trying to woo investors, as the president said that he wants to leave a legacy of free and fair, credible elections, and that trying to resolve the ongoing escalation of security issues in the country. He feels that it's not only Nigeria that is having the problem, and that in the Sahel, in sub-Saharan Africa, some of these challenges are ongoing because of desertification, because of climate change and all that. So there are movements and talks going on. Let's be hopeful that perhaps they could find solutions to addressing some of these challenges confronting particularly Africa.
Well, let's bring Kenyan President William Ruto into the equation. Him speaking at his, making his very first address at the 77th Annual General Assembly. And he talked about debt and the amount that Africa owes the rest of the world, and what the rest of the world can do to certainly write off some of the debt. I mean, he's talking about $6.5 billion that Kenya had to pay, I think, in the last year, to the Bretton Woods institutions in terms of what it is that they owed, and which is more than a half of Kenya's revenue.
Well, the Ghanaian president also said similar thing, saying that the credit ratings have not been fair to Africa, downgrading Africa debt rate, making it difficult for them to even borrow on the world market, and that they borrow at a higher rate than wealthier nations, making it a cycle where they have to borrow to service the debt, and that is making it difficult. He also called and backed President Ruto's call for some debt relief or debt cancellation, so Africa could be better placed, because Africa has been affected by the pandemic and the ongoing conflict in Russia, or in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So these are some of the things that are going on. He made the call, and some of the African leaders that I was fortunate to be in sideline meetings with echoed similar issues, and they are also calling on the Bretton Woods institution to partner them to try to resolve some of these headaches that confronts them, because it makes it extremely difficult, they say, for them to really put in mechanisms to create jobs, create the enabling environment that investors would want to come in and invest to boost their GDP, to boost their local production. So it's a challenge, and I am hopeful that as they seek partnership, they will try to find solutions to their respective problems in Kenya and elsewhere in Africa.
And Peter, very quickly, final thoughts. Central African Republic President putting a challenge out to the polluters, if you will, and challenge them to honour their commitments. And he was speaking, obviously, to the West, who are the greatest polluters. They made multiple promises about the amount of money that they will put in towards dealing with issues around climate change. Your thoughts on that?
Well, he is not alone. Quite a number of African leaders have been unanimous, and they have unified in their quest to seek partnership with these Western nations. Some of them told me that it's not a blame game here or there. What it is some Western nations are also facing similar problems with climate change, although it might not be as dire as what Africa faces or African countries face. So they are calling for partnership so there will be a united front to confronting and finding solutions to addressing some of the pressing challenges or the consequences and the effects of climate change, Africa bearing the brunt of it. So let's see how some of these discussions go and see what will come out of it, if they will find some lasting solutions to addressing some of these challenges.
Peter, certainly appreciate your time this evening and trust you'll enjoy what's left of those sessions. Voice of America's Peter Clottey, who was speaking to us live from New York.